inhabit a restless earth. This is an adolescent land in a state of constant turmoil and endless transformation. The towering peaks of the St. Elias Range continue their climb ever higher into the sky. Volcanic Mount Wrangell vents steam into the cold, thin air, awaiting its next eruption. Titanic glaciers grind their inexorable way to the sea. And as the vast wilderness of Wrangell-St. Elias only now emerges from the last ice age, the architectonics of the planet itself are revealed. I first came to Wrangell-St. Elias when I was 6 years old, carried along by my father's dream. As for so many of his generation, his travels during World War II had awakened in him a desire for distant horizons. His dreams of Alaska most likely were born in boyhood readings of Jack London, Rex Beach, and the expeditions of Israel Russell found in old National Geographics. So one summer, Dad took our family north. Like those of the old explorers, our travels were not without incident. We endured 1,000 miles of gravel on the Alaska Highway, 7 flat tires, and camping under bridges and in ghost towns. In many ways, this film began on that boyhood adventure. And to finish it, I returned to the wildlands of Wrangell-St. Elias, still a little-known Alaska full of names that ring with romance. Skolai Pass, and the mile-high cliffs, Disenchantment Bay, Kennecott, Mount St. Elias. An Alaska that surpasses all imagination. The effort to comprehend the vastness of Wrangell-St. Elias is irresistible. In desperation, to divine the ineffable scale, we turn to the tour guide's litany of statistics. 9 of the 16 highest peaks in North America. A single glacier larger than Rhode Island. The Wrangell Mountains alone cover an area the size of Kennecott. The park itself is the size of 6 Yellowstones. One national park, larger than Switzerland, with higher mountains. The struggle to understand the magnitude of this landscape is ultimately futile, for Wrangell-St. Elias does not lend itself to meaningful comparisons. Here is the natural world at its most dynamic. A surging, seething wilderness where the vitality of geologic genesis is ever present. The 4 mountain ranges of Wrangell-St. Elias look like a succession of advancing waves, and they are. Waves of land, great terrains that have rafted up from the tropics over millions of years, like transoceanic breakers finally reaching the sands of a distant shore. The Pacific Plate dives under the North American continent along this lonely coast, buckling the Earth's crust and driving the St. Elias Range upward, more than 3 miles up from sea level, and still rising. The St. Elias is the highest coastal range in the world. The mountain barrier is so high, it captures the intense storms sweeping in from the Pacific and holds them hostage. Climbers consider this some of the fiercest weather on Earth. In the higher elevations, more than 60 feet of snow can fall in a year. deepening some of the world's heaviest snowpacks. A pellucid blue sky in the St. Elias Range is a rarity. Unlike the uplifted St. Elias Range, the Wrangells are skeletons of formerly immense volcanoes, most of them great shield volcanoes, among the most massive on the planet. Mount Churchill, today still and serene, was the source of North America's two most explosive and voluminous eruptions in the last 2,000 years. What has carved these jagged peaks down from gigantic lava domes is ice. This is the greatest concentration of glaciers on the continent. Hundreds of glaciers, fed by ceaseless winter snows, transform the landscape. These slow-flowing rivers of ice carve U-shaped valleys. The glaciers scrape hillsides bare and deposit millions of tons of earth in the braided brown rivers that flow down to the sea. Even as the glaciers scour the mountains down to bedrock, life takes hold almost immediately, creeping up the slopes of moraines as the glaciers recede. Pads of dryas hold down the silt and begin the march of life, creating soil other plants will need to gain a foothold. Eventually, the boreal forest succeeds, so dense it hides the prodigious wildlife. Below the surface of emerging fjords, another forest hides the denizens of the ocean realm. The elemental forces at work in Wrangell-St. Elias have conspired to create avenues for life to exist. Pioneering plants, muskeg bogs, predators, and prey have a grand stage on which to explore their timeless connections. Gigantic forces like the churning geology of Wrangell-St. Elias regard humankind with primordial indifference. But this magnificent landscape is not merely a vast and pristine wilderness. To travel in these mountains is to journey back in time, to see what much of the world looked like during the Pleistocene, the age of ice. The same environment that shaped human evolution in northern lands. Native people have lived here for millennia, bold and resourceful enough to traverse the Bagley ice field to trade copper along the coast. We look at this empty land and imagine that it has been untouched. Yet the Atna people will often have a name for a peak that lies nameless on our maps. Survival in a harsh environment requires an intimate knowledge of the landscape. Subsistence hunting and fishing are a part of the fabric of bush life in Alaska, a symbiosis of nature and culture. But Wrangell-St. Elias is not an easy or forgiving place. Whatever the reasons for entering it, this wilderness requires a high degree of self-reliance. It is not that the land is hostile, merely indifferent and infinitely demanding. These are transcendent mountains with the power to change the landscape and to captivate the souls of those who venture into them. I first came to Wrangell-St. Elias when I was 6 years old. It was the first time I had ever seen a moose, or an eagle, or a bear. Like my father, I too read Jack London and Robert Service. Today, my Alaskan dreams are given shape by their literary descendants: John McPhee, Velma Wallace, Barry Lopez. Now that my father is gone, I come here to rediscover him. And, as always in the wilderness, I find something more. This changing landscape of Wrangell-St. Elias has an immutable power. In a place where the mountains themselves are evanescent, we too are changed. I come to Wrangell-St. Elias not only to recapture a memory of my childhood, but to perceive the relationships made visible by this great land. Like that between the salmon and the bear, the glacier and the river, the mountains and the sea, the earth and space, father and son. To understand not only the parts of life, but the sum.
At the beginning of the 20th century, the world was hungry for copper. Copper was essential for building ships, locomotives, and automobiles. Every home needed copper pipes. Electricity was the energy of the future, and copper wire was the key to bringing electricity to the world. In 1900, two prospectors discovered the richest deposit of copper ore left in the American West. The copper was on a steep, rocky peak surrounded by rivers of ice in the heart of the Alaskan wilderness. This region of Alaska is now known as Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve. The exceptional richness of the copper ore shocked the mining world. Typically, copper ore contained 10% copper. This ore contained as much as 85% copper. Two wealthy industrial investors made a bold plan to mine the copper. The J.P. Morgan and Guggenheim families pooled their resources and formed the Kennecott Mines Company, named after the glacier next to the copper lode. They faced extraordinary challenges. How would they get the copper from the steep snowy mountaintop and transport it across 200 miles of gravel-covered glaciers and steep mountain passes? Would it be possible to work through long Alaskan winters with 50 below zero temperatures and relentless snow? And the biggest question of all, would the endeavor be a success or a financial failure? Between 1905 and 1911, the company built a 200-mile railroad connecting the mines to the nearest seaport. Crews had to build 30 miles of trestles to raise the tracks over rugged terrain. Every piece of material used in construction had to be brought in by a combination of steamships and sleds pulled by dogs or horses. To get around river rapids, workers dismantled entire steamships, brought them over the mountains, and reassembled them on the other side. The Kennecott Mines Company also organized a steamship line to bring the copper from the Alaska coast to a smelter in Tacoma, Washington. At the top of the Copperfield Ridge, miners blasted 5 mines and connected them with 70 miles of tunnels. They built 3 miles of aerial trams to bring the copper down from the mountain. The mining town of Kennecott sprouted up and would eventually support 20 families and hundreds of workers. The Kennecott Mines Company had to contend with one final challenge. The copper coming down the trams was mixed in with limestone, which had no value. A typical piece of ore coming down the tram might have contained 40% copper and 60% limestone. Moving the rock by train and steamship was expensive, and the company couldn't afford to ship the limestone along with the copper. They had to devise a way of separating the copper from the limestone. For this, they built a 14-story concentration mill that still towers over the town of Kennecott. The mill is a maze of chutes, ladders, and mysterious machinery. It's full of winding catwalks and creaky floorboards. If you look hard enough, you can still piece together the story of what used to happen inside the mill.
Okay, we're here at the bottom of the jumbo tramway, which brought ore down to the mill from the jumbo mine. Cars containing 250, 300 pounds of ore would come down on this cable and then break loose and go onto an overhead track. At this time now, muscle power takes over until we're ready to go. Your tram operator is pushing the car through and taking it over to the crushers.
The mill had 4 basic parts. The top part of the mill was for crushing and separating the rock. The second part was for concentrating the copper. The third and fourth sections were for extracting the copper through leaching and flotation. The milling began with crushing.
First thing you need to do is to reduce the material to a size that you can work with it. It's already been broken twice up in the mine. Once when it's blasted loose from the face, and then once through a crusher before it goes into the tramway cars. Now when it gets here, it goes to the primary crusher for the mill, the jaw crusher. We're going to make it smaller once again.
This first crusher broke the rock into pieces the size of marbles. Some of these pieces had high levels of copper. Workers picked out these high-grade pieces and sent them down a chute that went directly from the top of the mill down to the train. The rest of the ore went through giant rolling sieves that separated the sandy gravel from the larger pieces of rock. The larger pieces went on to more crushers until all of the material was sandy gravel. This sandy gravel moved into the second part of the mill, which was the concentration section. Here, the mill took advantage of the fact that copper is heavier than limestone. The mill had rooms full of gravity concentration tables that separated the 2 kinds of rock by weight.
It has a slight tilt towards that end. It also has a slight tilt that way, away from the feed side. Ore, which is called pulp in this case, a mixture of rock and water, comes into this large box and spills out through the backside across the table. Processed water comes in through this small box, flows down along the channel here, and we adjust the flow with these diamonds so that it comes evenly across the backside and goes across the table. Now, when the ore is coming in, the table is bouncing back and forth, the ore is bouncing up and down, the water is flowing this way. Light materials, waste materials bounce higher. The small, heavy ore particles can't climb over more than 1 or 2 or perhaps 3 of these ripples. So we get a dark streak here, which is a high grade, which falls off that end of the table. We get a light white streak, which is the limestone, which is waste, goes across the table that way.
The dark, rich ore from these tables washed into giant settling tanks. From there, the ore was placed into sacks for the train.
Now, the way it works is I take a jute bag, which is all dusty and everything, but it would have been then too, fit it onto the machine. This bar holds it in place. Then I pull this lever, which opens a chute, fills the bag, and I shut it off. Now if I've got too much, I got a mess to clean up. So I release the bag, tie it up, and let it slide out onto a track, out onto the railroad car.
The waste rock from the concentration tables was sent on for further processing. Most of this rock was sent to the third part of the mill, which was the leaching section.
We've left the concentrator behind, and we've crossed over into what is called the leaching plant. Now over here, chemistry and science solves a specific problem. What to do with all the waste that looks like this stuff, except it's full of copper?
The gravel was poured into giant leaching tanks and then covered with ammonia. The ammonia dissolved the copper out of the limestone, and once again, the copper ore was sacked and put on the trains. Some of the ore that came off of the concentration tables was too small to be sent through this leaching process. This sandy ore was sent straight from the tables to the fourth section of the mill, which was the flotation section. Here, copper could be extracted from even the tiniest piece of powdery sand.
This tank, and many more like it back that way, are filled with eucalyptus oil. And you have air bubbling up through it. The oil forms a bubble, a sheen around the bubble, and the finely ground copper ore sticks to the bubble and comes up and forms a froth on top. It almost, looks like whipped cream, except it's gray and ugly. And you have paddles that then beat it off the sides. It falls into a trough, slides down into a drying area, and then you sack it, put it on the train, and like everything else, it eventually goes to Tacoma.
Through all of these steps of crushing and concentrating, leaching and flotation, the mill extracted 98% of the copper that came down from the mines. This is considered good even by today's standards using modern technology. One of the most amazing aspects of the Kennecott operation was that it functioned 363 days of the year. Workers managed to keep the trains and trams running through months of below zero temperatures and deep, immobilizing snow. The mines ended up producing $100 million in profit before the ore vein ran out in 1938. The Kennecott Mines Company used this phenomenal profit to purchase more copper mines in the southwest United States. It went on to become the nation's largest copper company and an international force in the metals market. Once the ore ran out, Kennecott was quickly abandoned. Only the most expensive items were taken out by train. Everything else, from dining tables to tram cars, was left behind. Over the years, Kennecott became a popular tourist destination. It was a place where people could step back in time and experience part of Alaska's wild frontier. In 1986, Kennecott was recognized as a National Historic Landmark. In 1998, the National Park Service acquired significant buildings in the town of Kennecott and 2,800 acres of the surrounding mining claim. The Park Service is now working with other partners in preservation to stabilize the mill and many other main buildings. Today, Kennecott continues to attract visitors from around the world. They come to see the breathtaking beauty of the peaks and glaciers that dwarf the town. They come to marvel over how such an elaborate operation came to exist in such a remote wilderness. Kennecott tells a remarkable story of human perseverance and of how a nation hungry for copper went to incredible lengths to get it.